Hello, and welcome to the BSA Race and Architecture series. Today's program is Design Education, Pipelines, Pathways, Pedagogies, Profession. My name is Natasha Spada, AIA, and I'm the founding principal of Studio NA Architects and the 2020 president of the BSA. Thank you all for joining us today for the BSA's Race and Architecture series, which is aimed at listening, learning, and engaging from architects of color as we educate ourselves of the challenges at hand. Architectural education and how the BSA supports the pipeline of students entering the profession has been very important to me and to the BSA this year. We have been active in providing resources and support for students, particularly for BIPOC students and emerging architects. The BSA AIA board has 6 board members representing the local schools, and this year we created a separate committee for them to meet and share information. We also included RISD, UMass Amherst, and Roger Williams. In the spring, we began all of this work during COVID when most students lost their internships, and we did not want to lose students in the profession. Some of these initiatives have included coffees for students with emerging professionals and from principals, and it also included finding ways to support students through licensure. It really shouldn't come as a surprise to us that homogeneity perpetuates architecture because it perpetuates the education of architects. From my experience many years ago through my architectural education, I don't remember seeing any women of color and very few men of color in academia. For those of us who came from different cultures, when we were in architecture school, we felt the need to repress our full potential of expression for fear of being discriminated and lack of opportunity. I believe that unless professors and administrators are educated in the different cultures that are represented in these student bodies, they cannot understand the potential of the students that they are teaching. There's also a very specific way in which projects are taught, developed, and presented in the architecture schools. It includes the way students and professors dress, speak, and articulate their work. I believe this discourages diversity of expression and individuality from those who do not fit the mold. Any variation from the norm is discouraged and at times unwelcome, so those of us who did not fit the mold had to reinvent ourselves to fit in. So for the past 30 years, I have taught and been a critic at many of our local architecture schools, and I have seen very little changes. And I have hope. I have seen a more diverse faculty in gender, but not in race nor ethnicity. And architectural education has a profound impact on what the profession will look like in the future. So if we want the profession to be equitable and diverse, we need to be proactive in opening up the opportunities for those who may not know that this is their path. Once they are in their schools, we need to support and encourage their diversity and help them create a path into the profession. So unless major structural changes occur in academia and in licensure, I don't see how we're going to change the face of our profession, the design of our cities, and how we shape the world. So I'm really optimistic about this panel. I'm very excited about who will be speaking today. But before I begin all of this, I'd like to talk about some housekeeping and general updates. The BSA programs, I just want to encourage everyone to visit architects.org for information on upcoming programs and knowledge community meetings. There's Equity in Architecture and EDI Network that is doing some really great work this year, and BOSNOMA and many others. So for our Q&A period, we have selected a number of questions that were submitted ahead of time. Thank you for sharing these, and we also encourage you to ask the panelists questions by using the Q&A function. This session is being recorded, and it will be posted on architects.org in a few days. And please join us on Tuesday, November 24th, from 12 to 1:30 for the next Race and Architecture series. So now I am excited to introduce to you your co-host. In general, we also want to hear from you. Please add your response and comments in the chat to the question, how do we bridge education and the profession? We want to make sure that we can engage everyone. And so I'm now excited to introduce you to our co-host, Greg Minot, my partner at the BSA, the president for 2021, and the managing principal of Dream Collaborative.
Thank you so much, Natasha. And today I'm thrilled to introduce our esteemed panelists and our moderator for this important program. So just reading from left to right across the slide. First up, we have Dr. Mahesh Daas, who is the distinguished professor, is the 8th president of the Boston Architectural College. President Daas is a designer, technologist, and an experienced academic leader. His career spans 23 years at 4 universities, including 14 years in higher education leadership roles. Prior to becoming president of the BAC, Mahesh served as Dean of the School of Architecture and Design at the University of Kansas, Lawrence. Next, we have Stephen Gray, who is an Associate Professor of Urban Design at Harvard University Graduate School of Design, and also the founder of Boston-based design firm Grayscale Collaborative. His interests center on political and cultural justice in cities, socio-ecological urban design approaches to resilience, and the intersectionality, rather, of humanitarian aid and design. Next, we have Judas Kinnard, who is an architectural education and an award-winning designer. She started her teaching career at Syracuse University in 1979, shortly after completing her professional degree at Cornell. Judith was one of the first women teaching design studios at Syracuse, Princeton, and the University of Virginia, and was the first woman architect to be tenured at the University of Virginia. Throughout her career, Judith has maintained an active commitment to practice. Next, Mónica Ponce de León is the founding principal of MPDL Studio and Dean of the Princeton University School of Architecture. Among her many prestigious honors, Mónica received the National Design Award in Architecture from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian National Design Museum. In recognition of her extraordinary contributions in academia, in 2018, Mónica received the ACA-DIA's Distinguished Teaching Award, and in 2020, the Women in Architecture Award from Architectural Record. Lastly, but not least, we have Robert Alexander González, who will serve as our moderator for today's discussion. He is an architect, an architectural historian, and a professor of architecture and dean of the School of Architecture and Planning at the University of New Mexico. He is ACSA's president-elect, and he serves on the Architecture Lobby's Board of Directors. Robert completed his undergraduate studies at the University of Texas, Austin, and his graduate and doctoral degrees at MIT and the University of California, Berkeley. So welcome to our panelists and moderator, and I will allow Robert to take it away. Thank you.
Have to unmute. Thank you so much, Greg and Natasha and the Boston Society of Architects for the invitation today. And we're very excited about the panel today. And I think we're gonna just begin with our first panelist, Mahesh Daas, and who will be talking about diversity and representation and anti-racist models. So, Mahesh.
Great, thank you, Robert, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and what an important occasion, and what a great topic to take up, and a timely one. So thank you, BSA, and let's go to the next slide. Great, so let me, before we go in, just provide a couple of framing thoughts about race and racism, because I will be referring to them throughout the presentation. I'm pretty sure there are different ways of framing it, but this is something that I wanted to offer for this presentation. So I would interpret race in two particular ways, class and caste. And caste is something that Isabel Wilkerson has really written extensively about, and something that I am familiar with from India, where I grew up and I came to this country. And it finally connects me to both experiences through this framework. So I thought it is very useful, both in the US context, but for that matter, any other context with some nuances. So caste is something that is unalterable structural power, whereas class is something that is reasonably alterable at an individual level. And one good example would be Barack Obama, who would be cast in a particular light, but he is well educated and has come up in life and has become the president. And so Daas has made progress. So that is how these things work. And racism, I'd like to also distinguish between the individual behavioral and institutional structural. And I'm going to focus really on the institutional and structural models. That is because often those are the most difficult to transform, the most challenging, and require extraordinary effort by a concerted group of individuals and organizations. Next slide, please. So I would also like to kind of frame between the individual and institutional versus power. As we go into the discussion today, we will be talking about credentials. We will also be talking about cultures, and particularly with respect to the castes, if you will, or camps, and class, and or wealth for that matter, and how they might potentially alter the spectrum of power or not. And that is this kind of a framing thought. Next one, please. So very quickly, what I'm going to show today is how the BAC has taken a particular approach to these questions and the questions of institutional and structural solutions to addressing the challenges posed by racism. And so the mission, first of all, the BAC's mission, it puts it right there. It is, BAC provides excellence in design education, emerging from practice and accessible to diverse communities. And that is what has attracted me to the BAC over a year ago. Next, please. So very quick snapshot of the BAC. 130 years ago, the BAC started as a Boston Architectural Club. And it was a club, a place for conversation, open, inclusive, for whoever wanted to be part of the conversation. So I thought this is really not like any club that I know of. And so I call it the Boston Architectural Unclub. And at that time, even, it was a home, intellectual home for immigrants and children of immigrants and many other people who would otherwise not have access to education, and it filled a gap that was present in the country. And then in 1944, it became Boston Architectural Center. But the interesting thing about the center is that the BAC was not in the center of the circle, if you will. It is on the margin, on the edge, on the periphery. And so I called it, it is an anomaly. It's a geometric anomaly. It's a center that does not exist in the middle of a circle, but on the edge of a circle. So I called it the Boston Architectural Uncenter. And in 2006, it evolved, grew in complexity, many programs offered, and it became Boston Architectural College. And I call it playfully Boston Architectural Collage for a particular reason of the model that I'm going to be explaining shortly, that it is a very unusual context and a very innovative approach to architecture and design education. And right after it became a college, the college also started the very first in the country accredited online architecture degree. Next, please. So a quick snapshot of the diversity of the BAC. It is, as you can just simply see, it is evident, the diversity that we foster, nearly not enough, particularly in the category of Black African-American, it is still underrepresented. We have challenges, and I think that is what moves us forward to think hard about how to change the picture. Even in an institution, I have served previously in predominantly white institutions where there would be 75 to 82% white, but this is the first, or the second, I should say, where I have served with such diversity, and look forward to doing more to promote that and forward it. Next, please. So wanted to quickly contrast the BAC model and approach with what I would call conventional models. And this is not necessarily any one place, When I say conventional, and I mean that these are the models in practice around the country, perhaps around the world, and the BSc model contrasts significantly. It is almost an upside down model. For instance, selective admissions are celebrated in higher education world today, whereas at the BSc, we value by mission, inclusive and open admission. And second is, most institutions prize privileged students to come in and privileged students to go out. And at the BSc, we really focus on how to provide access to the underprivileged and the underrepresented and empower them. Thirdly, often, and this is not necessarily the case with all the schools, but many schools where I have seen academia versus practice, kind of an approach, sacred and profane, that we are higher, we are better somehow than practice, which I do not understand. But at the BSc, we integrate learning in academia with learning in practice. So I call it the practice integrated model. And, and there are, of course, discussions about 4 years or 5 years or 6 years. And at the BSc, we really look at it as life integrated model. We provide lifelong education and concurrent education as well, where the question does not arise just the same way as it might in other contexts. And then we'll also show you a snippet about, return on the investment that students might be putting in. And finally, at the BSc, we really try to build communities, not camps or cults. And that's very important to us. Next, please. So again, the conventional model is sequential, where academic work is done 5-6 years, and then throw the students over the wall to practice. And then in practice, they learn, and then finally sit for the exam if they do, and it takes a good bit of time, as we all know. But that also squeezes out much diversity in the process, in the name of rigor, in the name of meritocracy, which are all, questionable. And at the BSc, we take a different approach. Next, please. So at the BSc, we take a more stacked approach where academic work, practice work, and licensure process are concurrent, and therefore we call it the concurrent model. And we actually assess practice work. I know our Dean, Beth Lindell Garver, is in the audience today, and our practice unit does tremendous work in actually working with practitioners to assess the work, provide feedback to the students and the practitioners who are actually employing the students as well, and encourage them to sit for the licensing exams. We just have had 3 students graduate with licensure this past year, which is probably, 50% of the total graduates in the country through the IPAL program. And in the process, we worked with 81 firms this spring, numbers. And over the past 15 years, we have worked with 1,672 firms, companies, communities, and partners in general. So that is how integrally we work. Next, please. I wanted to give a snapshot of the social justice initiative that we have just started taking up. And this is my way of summing up how comprehensive our approach is, internally, externally, and also thinking about the capacity and data to power a variety of things that are going to come up. But we are really at the forefront of this process at the BSc. Next, please. We also just launched, talking about access, Cloud Canopy, that the BSc Cloud Canopy was launched in summer, and we actually accelerated it. We were supposed to do it probably sometime next year, but we accelerated because of COVID situation as an opportunity. And we have already logged 11,000 hours of access in the cloud from 10 different countries. Next, please. In a way, we take an ecosystem approach at the BSc. We don't look at ourselves as an ivory tower or an isolated tree, but more like a banyan tree, where it grows through partnerships, it grows as an ecosystem. And so partnerships on the K through 15 side, and that is K through 12 plus community colleges plus 3-year degree colleges, and open admissions to dual enrollment programs that we are considering now, to partnering with the firms and a variety of companies and communities. So together, it is a very robust ecosystem. So although BAC's footprint in the Back Bay is small, our presence in Boston, but also in the world, is large to provide that access and diversity. Next, please. So let me sum it up with proof is in the pudding moment, where in the grad reports rankings, I don't generally like ranking systems, but this one is particularly based on some concrete data, so valuable in that regard. In terms of the median earnings of graduates 1 year out, and this is where the BAC graduates rank #1, followed by a number of other schools, as you see on the list. So to some extent, I think we have succeeded in providing both access and excellence. However, we are fully conscious and aware of the challenges ahead of us at every possible level. And I look forward to talking more about it during the conversation that follows. So thank you, appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mahesh. So I'm going to go ahead and move us down. Traveling down St. Charles Avenue, we go from the BAC past the little technical school across the river all the way down to Harvard. So Stephen Gray is next, and he's going to be talking about value proposition and career trajectories.
Thank you, Robert. So go to the first slide. Thank you. So the design of cities really concentrates urban resources in some places and marginalized communities in others. But many designers still operate with either formal or social impact imperatives, ignoring the very real social implications, good, bad, or otherwise, that our designs have for society. And now we're experiencing two colliding public health emergencies, COVID-19 and structural and systemic racism. Both have public health, public policy, and design implications, and both are overwhelmingly harming or killing Black people. So how well have architecture and the allied disciplines really engaged with these challenges? So far, I'd say not very well. The United States is founded on a resilient and highly adaptive white supremacist capitalist racial ideology. And it's really been what has justified spatial and economic exclusion through segregation and redlining, racial terrorism through Jim Crow laws and community massacres, community theft from blockbusting and predatory lending, targeted community removal through urban renewal and federal highway programs, the criminalization of Blackness and the loss of voting rights and citizenship through mass incarceration and deportation, or simply blanket ethnic exclusion. And despite all of this, many architecture students still graduate thinking that redlining is nothing more than a marked up drawing set. Next slide. So what's missing in design schools? It's diverse perspective. We need more faculty, staff, and students of color. And we need to ask ourselves why they're missing. Some see this as a pipeline and recruitment issue, which it is, and that we need to really extend our pipelines to reach younger and more diverse spaces, to more actively recruit undergraduates from HBCUs or other places, or establish more intentional hiring practices. The GSD, like many other schools, has a summer program called Design Discovery that introduces prospective students to design. We also offer a version that's targeted and focused on high school students called Design Discovery YA. And while this program is currently very small with only a dozen or so students every summer, if invested in, these types of programs could become one such pathway. Next slide. So some see this as a curriculum issue. that we need more courses that center on Black and Brown narratives, better equipped faculty to support students who are addressing questions of difference, more curriculum on topics of race and racism, basic instruction about design's role in perpetuating uneven power dynamics and systems of oppression. So I teach a course called Urban Design in the Color Line, which addresses these issues directly, connecting cultures of racism, an understanding of racial ideological constructs that justified slavery and continue to justify oppression, connecting that to geographies of racism, understanding the spaces in cities where people of color are and are not and why, to infrastructures of racism, which takes us to the scale that design engages in most directly. After all, the dividing lines between Black and white communities are parks, roads, developments, water bodies, or other physical infrastructures, which implicate designers in the problem, but also can empower us to help to imagine solutions. So in this course, students are also paired with organizations responsible for implementing large-scale urban infrastructures so that the students have a way to apply their lessons learned to real-world projects in real time. In the Urban Design Core Studio, we introduce students to issues of housing, the housing crisis, climate change, and environmental degradation, but we can still go further by framing these issues in more explicit terms of right to housing, health equity, as well as climate and environmental justice. So school-wide, the GSD has established a fund a few years ago, about 5 years ago, to cover the costs of guest critics of color so that we can increase the diversity in conversation across the school during reviews. We recently extended that to also cover the cost for midterm reviews. The African American Student Union hosts a biannual Black in Design conference. We 2 years ago hired Naisha Bradley, who is our first Assistant Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, to conduct a school-wide equity audit, which is currently underway. All GSD faculty are now required to participate in a mandatory racial equity training, which is also underway. And the GSD Development Office recently established the GSD Racial Equity and Anti-Racism Fund to support individual, departmental, and school-wide initiatives that support us moving towards actively working against structural racism. Next slide. In reality, the problem is both pipeline and curriculum. And the real question is about value proposition. All students, but students of color in particular, are looking for resources and tools that help advance the interests of their families and communities. They seek out fields that either pay well, so that's not this one, or that are relevant, and that should be this one. They look for faculty that look like them, curriculum that resonates with their lived experiences, and opportunities to be involved in research that addresses societal issues and cultivates tools for advancing equity. In the Urban Planning and Design Department at the GSD, the recently initiated Code Design Initiative seeks to do just that by tightening the links between design pedagogy, research, practice, and activism, building a learning by doing partnership format with nonprofits, community groups, civic organizations, and government agencies in the greater Boston area and beyond, and fostering discussion and debate on the meanings and possibilities of co-design. So 2 recent initiatives within that include a partnership with the Boston Foundation for their Place Leaders Network, and with the Highline Network's Equitable Impact Framework, which you can see on the screen, which is connected to my Urban Design in the Color Line course. And students work with these organizations to essentially help them to define equity and then make recommendations based upon an audit of their leadership, of their current programs, and of the work that they want to be doing. Next slide. So reflecting on this country's long history of an intentionally racist planning and city building agenda, today's designers have an ethical obligation to realign our priorities and adopt intentionally anti-racist agendas that address the legacy pockets of inequity in Black and Brown communities. As educators, it is incumbent upon us to equip our students with the knowledge and methods to redistribute resources, redistribute opportunities, and redistribute power. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic, Stephen. Thank you for that presentation. Next, we have Judith Kinnard from Tulane, who's going to be talking about accreditation.
Great. Thank you for inviting me, Natasha, and others. I've enjoyed the presentations. Rather than sharing specifics about my own institution, Tulane University, which has had great, efforts and issues, successes and failures associated with these themes, I thought I would give some information that's related to the broader picture of the demographics in our discipline. I was president of the NAB for 2 years, and during that time, I had the opportunity to delve into the statistics a bit, which are really only accurate for about the last decade. They don't really report anything before 2008 or 9, I believe, because of their data wasn't reliable until that point. However, looking back further, there was a substantial effort of surveying the architectural community associated with the Boyer-Mitgang report in 1994. It was published in 96, but the statistics were from 94. So about 25 years. So if we look at the next slide, I think we see some trends that are very troubling across this longer arc, and we see a few trends that are encouraging. Perhaps the most troubling trend is the substantial decrease in the number of students in accredited degree programs over those 25 years, coupled with a substantial increase in the number of programs. Of course, there have been enormous strides in those years relative to women. I think we see that in most of our schools today. It's and certainly in the arc of my career, that has been a very major difference and a strong success. I say parenthetically to my students that in my 5 years at Cornell, I never had a woman faculty member in anything, not even in the humanities or classes outside of the Department of Architecture. Now, of course, few of our students would have that issue. But then if we look at the issue of African Americans, we can see that, there's a typo here, it was intended to be African Americans on both, that has, if anything, eroded, but certainly in the last decade, the statistics are not encouraging. We have not moved the needle at all. There have been some expansion of Hispanic representation in our schools. And then the major story in our academic disciplines relative to demographics is the huge number of international students. It's not listed in the statistical reports from 1994. I suspect because it was negligible at that moment, but now it's close to 20% of our students. So if we think about these statistics, there really are some very serious pipeline issues, absolutely relative to Black students in our schools, but in some other ways as well. Next slide. The average starting salary, I checked to see how that tracked from relative to inflation, and it's about the same. However, I believe that student debt load is significantly larger now, and I think that that is a major impediment to all of our students, but certainly students of color. Next slide. Now, this I don't need to delve into in great detail. NAB went into a substantial rewriting of the conditions of accreditation in 2020. And equity, diversity, and inclusion were a key theme, both in this statement, which is tied to an initial stating of the values of our profession and our academic community and our discipline as a unit, as a kind of cohort. And this was the language that they initiate that report with. And then the next slide talks about a new sort of set of evaluation criteria for schools, which is the based on the program rather than the student outcomes. In other words, the programs need to demonstrate how they are addressing a series of key themes in their curriculum in their structure, and in the experiences. So it's a little bit less in lockstep compared to what it used to be. It now allows schools to talk about special programs that maybe not every student experiences. I know at Tulane, a lot of our programs that most fully address themes of our engaging our community and social justice initiatives may not be participated in by all students, but they're a key to our identity and our ability to recruit students broadly. And then I think that might be the last slide. Is there another? So really, I think what I wanted to share with that was a kind of larger arc of the demographic issues and concerns and touch upon the NAB themes. I think few of us would argue that NAB criteria are going to solve this problem, either in terms of our curriculum or in terms of our demographics. But I do think that it is important to note that they are expanding the responsibility that schools have to address, report, and affirm these themes. I did not include the requirements for reporting on student and faculty diversity and efforts to improve that, but those are very much part of the 2020 conditions as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Judy. So now we're turning our attention to Dean Mónica Ponce de León, who will talk about access and licensure. And I don't believe there's a slide presentation. So this is a slide for questions to follow. So Mónica, we are turning our attention to you now.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for organizing this forum. It is wonderful to be part of this group. And thank you for inviting me to participate. There is much that I have to say about this topic, but as Robert said, I have been asked to focus my remarks on licensure. And I think we need to start the conversation about licensure by being honest. The profession is predominantly white and predominantly male. Only 2% of all architects are Black American. And in 2008, that number was 1.5%. If we do the math, at that rate, it will take 240 years for the profession to look like the rest of America. So I believe that in order to really change, we need radical change. I know that licensure is a sensitive subject. I'm a licensed architect. I belong to the rare 1% of Latinx architects who are NCARB holders. I'm first to go to college in my family. I work hard to get my license, and licensure has been empowering for me. But I know that it has not been this way for many. We need to stop talking about the path to licensure. Currently, there is not a path, but a series of roadblocks. According to NCARB, it takes 12.7 years on average to complete the core requirements for licensure. This doesn't take into account the number of graduates that never complete or never get started on the path. How can this be what we want for the architecture profession? So what do I think needs to change? I believe that we need to eliminate practical training from the process of licensure. Practical training is an exclusionary tactic that serves nothing but to maintain the power structures within the discipline. To be really accessible, architecture should be more like the legal profession. After graduating from an accredited program, our students should take the ARE exam and become licensed. Why do I believe that the requirement of practical training is the problem? Let's look at the history of licensure in the US. Calls for licensing for many professions, not just for architecture, emerged during Reconstruction. And there is a great deal of scholarship about how licensing was used after the Civil War as a tool to discredit Black skilled labor. Architecture is no different. And within this legacy, the requirement of practical training is particularly disturbing. Apprenticeship was a key component of the post-Civil War racist Southern Black codes. I believe that to reverse this legacy, we need a system of licensure that acknowledges the gross inequities of the profession and a licensing system that is designed to remedy them, not a licensure system that perpetuates them. In the beginning of the 20th century, the emergence of architectural education at the university was intended to replace the apprenticeship model. Education was intended to make the professions more accessible. But in the 1920s, practitioners who had never attended the university expressed concern that graduates did not have enough hands-on training, claiming building safety concerns. And so began the calls for experience as a requirement for licensure. I want to point out that there is no evidence that working for another architect for 3 years has made buildings any safer. However, at a fundamental level, practical training has ensured that those who are licensed have de facto control who can or cannot get licensed. I understand that most of us mentoring apprentices in our offices have the best intentions. However, structurally, the system is set up so that architects who are not trained as supervisors or educate or to mentor are actually in charge of mentoring. And at the core, all architects have a conflict of interest in providing this oversight over licensing. And no matter how much NCARB tries to equalize experience, there's no way that the experience gained in a small local firm is the same as the experience that you get working at a large multinational corporate firm. The current argument in favor of practical training has been that the ARE has too many problems, or the schools do not teach students what they really need to know. If this is the case, then let's change the ARE. If this is the case, then let's have the NAIB change the requirements for accreditation. Let's not fix one perceived problem by creating another. In theory, it takes about 3 years to complete the AXP. It is 3 years of reduced wages, 3 years during which someone else has power over your future. That is, if you're able to land that first job with a licensed architect. That is, if you do not graduate into a recession. There are some that argue that eliminating the apprenticeship model will, quote, lower the standards and undermine public confidence in the profession, end quote. I would like to argue that if we want to gain the public confidence, we need a profession that looks like the public. Thank you again for allowing me to voice my point of view.
Thank you, Mónica. Fantastic presentation, and altogether a lot of glimpses into the sort of innovative and in some cases extreme ideas that are out there to really take hold of this moment. I believe the post-BLM movement or the place where we are right now is what has led to so many new ideas, new initiatives, and the will of so many schools to step it up. I know I recently met with some deans of architecture who were interested in seeing what are schools really doing. And we all shared the sort of the lists of demands and the lists of statements that everyone is receiving, because there is a need to think more radically and more innovatively. It's I think, a very positive thing that we are seeing that over longer spans of time there are changes. I think the numbers, Judy, that you were showing us do show a lot of positive improvement. At my school at the University of New Mexico, I certainly wanted to begin the conversation, and did, with our faculty, not with what do we need to do, what are we not doing, but what have we already done? And I think a lot of schools are already doing this. I think the BAC is a perfect example of schools that have models, innovative models that have been exploring other ways to provide access to everyone. So I'd like to just open up the discussion now across all of our participants, and Natasha and Greg, and let's just talk about access. What are what are initiatives that you see that we can do now? And I don't know, can schools get together? Can organizations get together to make sort of larger moves happen, moving mountains? I think, Mónica, you're introducing the movement of a mountain here. So how do we begin to do this?
I think Stephen presented a really great overview of all of the different stages in which we need to address inequity. And you asked me to focus on licensure, but for me, speaking about pipelines is important. And I think that we have to move beyond thinking of pipeline as an after-school program or a summer program. At the University of Michigan and at Princeton, we started a collaboration with high schools in Detroit and in Trenton, where we actually introduce studio 5 days a week to high school students during their class block as a way of thinking of architecture as a form of knowledge, and as a way of thinking of design studio and learning through making as one more component of the high school curriculum and not an added on. So I think that rethinking what we have been doing for now many decades and how it hasn't really worked is essential. That doesn't mean that we have to start from scratch. That doesn't mean that we don't target all of, the entire arc of architectural education and the architectural profession. But we have to really look critically about what we have been doing and how to do it differently.
I have a question for Mónica. How did those programs turn out? Because I volunteered at the Muniz School here in Boston. They don't have that program, but for an entire day, I spoke to students and I felt like it was too late. Do you feel like the high school level is too late?
No, we don't feel that it's too late. And what we have done is that we have adapted to the specific high school. So for example, in Detroit, we're working with the entire public school system. So we actually have 5 high schools. And in that case, we're working with juniors. In Trenton, we realized in working with the high school, because Trenton is smaller than Detroit and they have only 1 high school, we realized actually that it fit better their sophomore curriculum. So we're working with sophomores. So when we compare the two, the advantage of the junior is that they are going to be applying pretty soon to college. The disadvantage is that they tend to already have set what they want to do in college, and some of them take the courses, but they don't necessarily plan to study architecture. We still think it's great because we're still open their eyes to what architecture can be. In Trenton, the challenge actually has been many of them become super passionate about architecture, but there is 2 years of distance between the moment that they took the studio and the moment that they're actually applying. So we have devised ways in which we maintain our connection to them and help them with their college application. So they pose different problems. So I think the strategy for us has been, we work directly with the high schools, we see what works with the high school, and our requirement is it has to be 5 days a week for 1 semester. It has to be 2 blocks of their day so that it's a real studio. And it's not a volunteering system. We actually have full-time fellows that work in our programs for 2 to 3 years, depending on what you're interested in doing. So there is a lot of continuity from 1 year to the next.
Yeah, Natasha, I think I could build on what Mónica has been saying. So at the BSc, we have been working with the school districts. Because it is such a decentralized system, right? The schooling systems. So we started working with superintendents and then with the teachers and such. We have discovered that you have to really start in the middle school stage. Why? Because students have already made up their mind, or parents have made up their mind as to the pathways leading to various disciplines or professions and majors. So we are really exploring how to begin in the middle school stage, going into high school, providing certain pathways, but also look at these not as pipelines, but rather as an ecosystem where you really have to cultivate design literacy very early. So more people are aware of the options and opportunities, where to go and how to do it. And then they can seek education One of the problems that we are seeing, why for example, the Black African American underrepresentation in education is students are not drawn to, are aware of the design opportunities. So I think that is where we need to start early. And one more thing that we are doing is with the Pro-Arts Consortium of schools in art and design circles here in the Boston area, we started Boston Arts Academy, which is really a school dedicated to the arts and design. So I think we need to do more of that, but really approach it not as pipeline, because when we think of pipeline metaphor, we think there is somehow enormous supply coming our way. We just need to widen the pipeline. That is not the case. We really need to grow the roots, and the ecosystem needs to be rich to be able to provide that expression of interest.
That in many ways, the broadening the youth of America's interest in architecture broadly is great, but it's difficult. This is not something that the education community can do with a few programs. I had suggested that the 5 presidents of the organizations take this on as a sort of landmark challenge, both for diversity reasons and broader issues, and perhaps tap into PSAT expressions of interest and launch a massive nationwide campaign to make really high quality resources available to teachers who are looking for support for their curricula. But that's a bigger theme. I think our real opportunity is working with the students we already have in the schools and making sure, sort of arcing back to what Natasha was saying, making sure we have a supportive environment, a curriculum that feels meaningful, and that the culture that we have all been educated under and which has engraved itself into who we are gets expanded and questioned, and in some cases turned upside down.
So there's been mention of design education, and how do we increase the value of design education and not make it an exclusive topic? Because I think that's another thing. Sort of design education in some way is tied to privilege. It's tied to a certain few in the profession. Even we imagine that only certain people in the schools could potentially end up becoming great designers. There's sort of a value system that's tied to that. So how do we sort of break that apart and really talk about design education as a value, as a resource that should be accessible to everyone?
Robert, maybe I can just kick it off and say that design literacy is part of our vision to be able to work at that level across a society, not just young students, but across a society. That is one. Number two is that we need to move away from design as an elite pursuit, but rather as a dire need for a society that is looking at very complex futures, right? So from all those perspectives, we need to make it more accessible, more connected throughout the education process from childhood and lifelong learning.
We also
I think Robert, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, Stephen, go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to say, we also need to change the way we celebrate architecture, because what makes it into the magazine, what gets the award, is what students will see as their goal. And what schools will focus on because the students are demanding it, and that's why they're going to a particular school. So we also need to change how we celebrate. It's this false binary that I talked about of, great design, high design, capital A architecture, and social impact design. There should not be a distinction. Every design has a social impact, and so we really need to decide what kind of impact we want to have, and because we will have one. And we are having one, and we see it reflected in our student body.
Robert, I think that at the heart of your question is, how do we deal with the problem of cost? The problem of cost is not exclusive to architecture. Higher education is expensive for all professions. We tend to say, oh, architects don't make a lot of money, but the truth is that when you look at most professionals graduating from universities, including engineers, they actually they make about the same as an architect. So it's not a problem exclusive to us. But how do we deal with it in the architecture profession, especially when architecture is so professor intensive? You can't have classes with 200 students taught by a single faculty and in design, let's say, and then claim that a student is getting their appropriate education. What we did at the University of Michigan is that we slowly moved away from merit scholarships to need-based scholarships. And at Princeton, when I looked at how we were awarding scholarships, I realized that if instead of having merit scholarships and non-merit scholarships, I realized that if we took that pile of money and we divided it equally among our students, and we're a small school, so we got away with this, that our students actually, every student got a 95% tuition scholarship. So it's actually cheaper to go to Princeton than to go to the BAC, which is sort of shocking when we arrive at this realization. We also decided to have a more democratic application system for our teaching assistantships, so that it was not the same students getting TA positions over and over and over again, so that then that 5% could be covered by getting one teaching assistantship during your time at the school. So we're trying to figure out how to acknowledge the problem of education being too expensive, look at what can be done within the institutional context, and then make changes that hopefully get us closer to an education that is affordable.
Robert, can I add something to this? Before COVID, so at the end of last year, Eric and myself, and I think Jenny from the BSA, went to talk to Rosalind Acosta, who is the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development for Massachusetts. She was asking us, at that time, we had a shortage of architects, and we were trying to figure out how do we increase the amount of architects and the amounts of equitable architects in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And she was asking us, she said there are all these opportunities for grants and stuff, but the way that but what do you need to be able to practice architecture? So we said, it's basically a set way of practice, of schooling, and then there's the BAC, but there's nothing in between, because she said there are opportunities for scholarships, but they're based on apprenticeships, which is very different than what we currently have in the system. So I'm just interested to see if anyone has any thoughts about that, because there were other fields that could take advantage of that workforce scholarships and improvement in general, but architecture couldn't. So is there a new way of thinking about this that we can create more visibility for architecture and can take advantage of some of these scholarships? And I don't have the answer. I'm hoping some of you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, Natasha, I think because you are referring to work integrated or practice integrated models, I think the BSc model is interesting because it is a partnership, and students do, of course, earn while they are learning from work, although we don't necessarily, it's not institutional aid. But I think the cost of education in higher education as a whole is, and there are many studies to show this, including one of my mentors did the study at UPenn, on how from the 1960s onwards, the US higher education has moved in a direction of proliferation of offerings, proliferation of courses, and curricula that are really, again, proliferating and out of whack, that have driven cost in a significant way. So to Stephen's point earlier about, we need to go back to the curriculum. Really, that is where some of the key points are in controlling the cost. That is one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is really how to make philanthropy to power this. And of course, elite institutions with large endowments are able to do this. And that is in fact why, to Monica's point, it is less expensive sometimes to actually go to elite institutions than to state institutions. And that is fact. That's of course, that's because of the endowment and the scholarships that are powering and bringing the cost down. Although the sticker price is very high, the actual cost is not that high when you have the power of philanthropy. But I think it is such a decentralized and really broken system that there is no one solution that works, but rather it may depend on the context of the institution. So the BSc model, would work in a very large metropolitan area like Boston, but it might not work in a rural campus town environment, right? So I think there are different models that need to be developed in different contexts.
Speaking of new models, even if, schools are now, thinking of ways to tailor faculty searches to attract faculty of color in sort of mass as much as they can, right? And even, Harvard, with all of the riches that you imagine, that it's true, it has a limited budget for hiring. And there's also a limited pool of faculty of color out there. And so as you take as Harvard hires a faculty of color from another school, they may be taking that person away from a larger pool of students of color that actually needed that person in that location. And so, we really need to think about breaking down institutional silos and working collaboratively. There's a new model called Dark Matter University, which many of you probably have come across, which is kind of an offshoot of the Design is Protest group. And it's basically a group of BIPOC faculty from Howard to Harvard and everywhere in between. And we are creating curriculum. We are adapting our curriculum. We're adapting to the COVID situation of live streaming. We're connecting schools. There's a joint course at Columbia and Tuskegee that Justin Garrett Moore is teaching. We are experimenting with breaking down these silos and creating a pool of faculty that actually can be tapped into by different universities. And so I think really challenging the sort of institutional model that we are able to sort of challenge, because we're all sitting in any part of the world right now where our students are in any other part of the world. We can really connect in really kind of dynamic and new and interesting ways, and share knowledge and share resources and share that with students that we really want to be targeting, but maybe we don't have them under our institutional umbrella. So I think we really need to be thinking creatively.
I think that's a brilliant idea.
I was going to say, Stephen, I'm so glad you brought up that university. It's been sort of the perfect paradigm shift storm with COVID and the sort of unleashing of online education, because that's allowed all of these folks. And the sort of finite body issue of BIPOC faculty is I think major, because we do see that sort of, I don't know how many times I found myself and others I know I've shared scanning websites of faculty of architecture schools just to see who is out there, and it is a finite body, and you take one from one school and then there's no one there, and how do you fill that gap? So there's sort of a sense that the pipeline just in that sort of faculty trajectory is not working. And I know Mónica has been thinking about this recently with the sort of latest Where's My People Latinx report that came out of ACSA. Dr. Kendall Nicholson, who is our research lead at ACSA, has produced two Where's My People, looking at African American people in academia, in architecture, and now with the Latinx group. And I think, the interesting thing with the Latinx study is that the numbers are increasing, but the optics still don't look right. They're not reflecting what we're seeing with the numbers. I'm wondering, Mónica, if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, I have, I am tired of the excuse that there is no Latinx or Blacks out there. And I hear this excuse in every institution I'm in. I heard that at Harvard when I was at Harvard. I heard that at Michigan, I was Michigan. I heard that at Princeton. And my attitude when I became a dean was to say, this excuse is not valid. And my attitude was to invest in people early on in their careers and give them opportunities early on in their careers. It's an alternative model to plug in somebody from another institution. And personally, I think what we need to do is create opportunities for graduates so that they can develop their work and so that they can join teaching if they want to join teaching, but also so that they can blossom their practices if they want to blossom their practices, and not use the quote unquote lack of bodies as an excuse, because then we're never going to see change. And I think, Robert, you're right that the Latinx community in particular is pretty evident, makes very evident that this is a false excuse. There are plenty of Latins attending architecture schools the same way that there are plenty of women attending architecture schools. So in the arc of my career, I have gone from hearing this excuse about women, Latinx, and Black, and the numbers in architecture schools for women certainly have not been there for a long time, in the sense that where are they in the profession when they have been in academia as students for a long, long time? And the women the numbers in the Latinx community are making it evident that we are here. Why are we not in academia? And why are we not in the profession in equal numbers? So I'm hoping that we can move away from saying there is not bodies and sort of raising our hands in dismay to figuring out how do we take the bodies that are already there and support them so that they develop.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's true. I mean, when you look at lists of, say, full professors, associate professors, tenured professors, the bodies are not there yet. But I agree that we are, everywhere. So there should be no excuse. So in bridging, bridging education and the profession, and this is open to all of our attendees, are we, is the academy pushing the profession? Are we sort of going to push the profession to make changes, or are we trying to catch up? I mean, obviously, I think we see the number of women represented in the profession go down right after they graduate. It does not go up, and it's not what we see in schools, and it's very, very evident, and that's been the case. And then with BIPOC representatives, it also goes down. So who takes the lead here, or how do we connect the two?
Well, Robert, I think let me take that on, and because we grapple with it quite a bit, we do not see it as academia versus profession, or practice, I should say, because both are professions. We do not see it as an either or, us versus them kind of an approach, but rather partnership. And that we are, let me just say that educational institutions may think they have a monopoly on learning, but they do not. Learning happens lifelong. Learning happens in every circumstance. And sometimes it is systematic, sometimes it is not. But it is a continuous process. And I think we really have to think more of partnerships and how to educate together to really let people realize their full potential. And I do agree with Mónica on the point that we really have to deliberately and actively work to remove the hurdles and not really throw them just in the name of rigor and meritocracy, which we know is spurious. So I think both have to be really looked at very carefully.
Any other thoughts? Oh, Natasha, you're on mute.
I'm muted. I think what Judy said when she was showing the statistics of architecture schools going down by 10,000 students in 10 years or whatever, that's
25
years.
Yeah.
is really eye-opening, because I was teaching a graduate school class a couple of years ago, and most of the students were not going to remain in architecture. So I think, and so the BIPOC students even worse, right? So I think we need to ask those who leave the profession to help understand why they left the profession, what were the barriers that they faced, because we're talking to the success stories in most cases. And we need to talk to the ones that are not success stories and understand what were the barriers that they couldn't overcome, and how can we start changing those. And I think kind of going at it the back way for all architects, but specifically for the BIPOC architects.
Mm-hmm. You know, what I have heard from my students over my long teaching career, what I hear from female students is that it's really difficult to work in somebody else's office and start a family. And it certainly was difficult for me. And to then at the same time have to put in those hours in the right kind of firm, it's not easy. So that's what I hear from women students, and I still hear that today. Then what I hear from Latinx and from our Black graduates is that when they look for work, they don't see themselves in the firms that they apply to. Mm-hmm. They also don't find the kind of work, as Stephen was saying, that they think is meaningful. Mm-hmm. So for them to consider spending 3 years working for a firm so that they become licensed is, we know it's not 3 years, we know it's 12.7. So to spend that amount of time doing work that you don't necessarily find meaningful, it becomes a life decision. So at a certain point, they decide that instead of doing that, they're not going to pursue licensure, and they're going to just do something else that they find meaningful. Now, I understand that there are schools that think that it's okay for our graduates not to pursue architecture. I don't think it's okay. I think it's a disservice to the students who are investing their money in architectural education. I think it's a disservice to society. I think it's a disservice to all the communities that don't get the service of architects that look like them. So when I hear other deans say, well, it's okay, they, X percentage of our students don't pursue architecture as a profession, I am uncomfortable with that position. And one of the reasons I'm arguing against the requirement of practical training is that my anecdotal evidence is that it is actually an impediment for women, it's an impediment for Latinx, and it's an impediment for Blacks.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, if you're not a white male, and I think this is still the case out there now, if you are not a white male, it is hard for you to imagine that you can walk into a great firm and at some point you're going to make partner. There is still a sense that that is a limited few who end up there, and I think that's the problem. That the firms, I think we're training our students to get there, but once they leave us, they know maybe I'll go work in another profession. This is not really for me. And it's tied to the structure of firms. It's tied to the way firms are represented and practice is represented. But it's also tied to, I think, the kind of design jury, design excellence speak that's already very evident in schools. So when you're an architecture student, you are already getting cues that you may not be on that path to be that excellent designer that's going to be picked up by a great firm, and you can move forward. So I think that is, I mean, if we're talking about bridging the two, I think that's right at the heart of it. It's sort of an unspoken understanding.
And although I find that that's been mostly erased with women students, the women students get awards is at an equal level to the male students. The profession is another story.
Yeah, correct. Correct.
But it probably is mostly white women students, because I think women of color do not expect.
That's true. At all. Well, there are so few women of color in my institution. 2 or 3 a year.
So Greg and I own firms, and we have minority firms and a minority woman firm, right? So what I've been reading a lot is the lack of investment. So if people can see themselves, right, as a firm owner or being able to start a firm, they need capital. And most of the equity firms only invest in white companies. And most people don't invest in architectures in our companies, but maybe they should. Maybe this is something that we have to really start thinking about. How do you create a pipeline for people to be able to begin firms that have a diverse representation? We were lucky that we were put in positions where we were mentored and sponsored to be able to do this and had support, but not many people are not that lucky. And so we have to think about how to start helping people of color really start becoming leaders in the profession.
But there is also, Natasha,
in AIA, isn't that something that AIA should be doing? Isn't that, I mean, BSA is a subsidiary, but like, isn't that something BSA can lead on and sort of create? Like, you know, there's this interesting, it's a little bit different, but there's this initiative called Pop-Up Hood in Oakland, and it's basically an organization that identifies areas that have high levels of vacancy, and then they open up a call for people who have business plans, and you submit your business plan, and if your business plan is great, then they connect you with a vacant space, and you rent that space at cost for a certain period of time until you're profitable, and it slowly increases. If your business plan isn't ready, they provide services to help you develop your business plan, get it ready, and then they provide a connection to these spaces. And what it ends up doing for individual entrepreneurs is providing a way for them to get in without much capital and to get a lot of support and training and input in that process. What it does for neighborhoods is it takes a neighborhood in an area that is underinvested and underactivated, and suddenly it's active with all of these shops and retail opportunities that people are sort of experimenting with. And if it doesn't survive after 6 to 9 months, then it doesn't survive. That person takes another pathway, and then a different shop goes in there, and so it keeps that active as well. And what it does for the real estate owners is it covers their costs where they wouldn't be covering. So is there a way, and this is a different thing, but is there a way for the AIA and the BSA maybe to take the lead on creating a pipeline opportunity, entrepreneurship, small business, pipeline opportunity for recent graduates, to help people think about how they would start their own profession, their own firm, and provide resources and training and support to do that, and then help place them with large member firms that are going after projects as subconsultants to get them into the sort of pipeline of practice.
I also think that we need to empower people so that they don't depend on anybody else. There is tons of communities out there that really need architectural services and that are doing calls for architectural services. And because of the model that we have of practical training, the big firms tend to not actually take those tiny little projects. And those tiny little projects, more often than not, do require licensure. So there is a whole area of community need that we as the profession are not fulfilling by not empowering recent graduates to just go ahead and practice on their own. So I think that that's a way in which we can really empower recent graduates to just do their thing and not depend on a good economy when they graduate, not depend on a firm hiring them, not depend on a firm providing them the right kind of experience so that they can complete their practical training, etc.
Maybe this is the connection between academic institutions and their graduating students and these professional associations under the AIA umbrella, because everyone's trying to do their own thing, and if you do it in isolation, as with everything, you don't really see the whole picture or really address the whole issue. And maybe Mónica, you teaming with Natasha and developing a Princeton to Boston kind of thing, or what I mean, like thinking creatively about these partnerships and what we can all bring individually to this larger challenge.
There's also a one moment in our collective curricula in architecture schools which can speak directly to this, and that's the professional practice class. that's taught in every school, and it's sort of a standalone class that always has to maintain its high standard because it's tied specifically to criteria for NAB accreditation and also to the exam. And I've seen that class taught in so many different ways at all the institutions that I've ever been at. That sometimes it focuses on the AIA contract, sometimes it focuses on litigation. I mean, it's all over the map. But that course could also develop into a course that looks at labor justice issues, that looks at alternative types of practices like what you're talking about, Stephen, co-ops, architecture co-ops, and that might be a place too in our curricula. I think, I don't know if we're thinking creatively enough about what that class could be, and maybe that could be the bridge class.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good place to start, because I remember even my professional practice class, it was like the thing that you had to do. You're really excited about studio, but you just had to do this to get your credits to move on and learn how not to get sued or something like that. But really it's I feel like it could be the bridge that kind of ignites that entrepreneurial skill and talent, and sort of learn how to run a business, run business planning through that kind of conduit. So I'm just curious, from your perspectives, how can practice help with shaping or intersect with that need to have more maybe entrepreneurial training for the students that are coming out?
Greg, I think let me take that, because we are actually actively looking to those opportunities to create ecosystem solutions for a culture of startups or culture of entrepreneurship. It is not just a question of curriculum, but rather co-curricular and extracurricular opportunities and or systems that support understanding entrepreneurship and understanding how to, it's not just a question of professional practice, but rather working in the innovation space as a whole. So the nature of practice itself could be transformed and diversified, but also the competencies necessary to start something new. Not a small business, I'm talking about scalable businesses, right? I think we have to get out of the mindset of preparing the students to work in a particular company or size of company or a type of company to actually blazing new trails in innovating through startups, through scalable enterprises, or being just simply entrepreneurial in many different ways, right? But at the same time, also make sure we are fulfilling the promise of what the students have come to us for. They have come to us seeking professional opportunities, and that means licensure and credentials, academic as well as professional credentials, right? So if we are really educating students for that, we need to make sure they succeed in that in a large number, not just in a small number as it is right now. So I think both have to be done. And that means we have to really break free from the traditional canons of architectural and design education to more entrepreneurial, partnership, and ecosystem-based solutions.
We also, at some point, we'll have another race and architecture series on this, but the biggest issue are clients. If the clients are not diverse and they're hiring the same firms for every project, and you don't have an opportunity to have a diverse group of architects become part of that conversation, we have a bigger issue of having work to create these successful entrepreneurship initiatives.
Absolutely, Natasha, to your point, earlier last week, sometime I was at a meeting with 50 presidents of university colleges in the Massachusetts area. And one of the things we were talking about is the business procurement processes in higher education world, where a lot of contracts get awarded to non-minority businesses, just as you said. And I think the back office deal making that happens, and cultivation of diversity in the procurement processes are very important. And that is why, in fact, in one of the diagrams that I had shown but haven't really talked about is how to transform our business procurement processes at our respective colleges and universities to seek out diversity.
Any other final thoughts on bridging the gap between education and practice? Mónica, Judy, and maybe Stephen, some final words?
Well, this isn't really a final word, but I was very troubled to read what Mike Armstrong wrote about proposing that we would have an accredited degree program that was a 4-year pathway into the profession. And I know it may sound like a typical academic that I value the educational model so much and we want to drum up business, but do we really think that out of that 12 years or however long it's currently taking to become a licensed architect, that they need less education? They need to have fewer opportunities to engage in research and enrich their depth of knowledge of the discipline that they're going to engage? I don't think so. I don't think that's going to make increase our diversity, increase the richness of what and who we are.
I think Mónica made the point perfectly. Mónica was talking about the need for. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What did you say again? I actually lost my train of thought.
I think we need to empower our graduates so that they have control over their destiny, so that when they complete their architectural education, they can immediately work on what they want to work on.
Yes, the point that you made was that we don't need people who aren't trained as teachers to be spending most of the time doing the teaching. That people who work in offices, if they're the ones who are sort of empowered to make the decisions and to give the training, that's not really where that lies.
Yeah, correct.
I think, oh, sorry, did you have?
No, go ahead.
So to your question, Robert, I think we need to be working together more. I mean, even in this conversation that the BSA convened, among people who are thinking about these issues from different institutions' perspectives, and from the professional world, these conversations aren't happening right now actually in this kind of way. Like, Mónica, I read your interview with Architecture Magazine, and then that's how I understand how you're thinking about things. But we're all internally trying to take these issues on within our institutions and within, the BSA and these other, professional associations, as opposed to doing it together. And so I think this Zoom format actually creates an opportunity, as much as we all hate it, to actually come together and have conversations like this, because I've learned a lot just from this conversation, in the last hour and a half. And imagine if we actually start working together, developing programs and agendas and collaborations across the sectors of education and professionalism, and across the schools themselves. I think we can really achieve a lot together if we don't stay inside our own little bubbles.
Thank you, Stephen. Oh, go ahead, Mónica.
I want to add to that and also expand on what Judith said about the 4-year program. I think we need to remember that NCARB is a 30 million a year operation, and that they make their money. And I understand it's a nonprofit, but still most of the 30 million is targeted towards salaries and executive salaries. They make that 30 million by perpetuating people in the system, by perpetuating students in the system. So I am very suspicious when the head of NCARB proposes a 4-year program, which of course will go to their bottom line as an institution based on absolutely no research. And I agree with Stephen, we need to stop relying on an institution like NCARB, which does not work with other architectural institutions, and it certainly does not work with schools. We need to stop relying on them as a way of making change. They have had plenty of years and decades of opportunity to make change, and they haven't.
Great. That is a perfect way to end this. Thank you, Mónica. And I just want to thank all of the panelists for joining us. And I'm going to let Natasha and Greg bring us to a closing. Oh, are we there?
Yes, we're here.
Okay, I just saw.
No, thank you. Thank you all. I was muted, sorry. Thank you all for joining us, and please share your feedback at bsa@architects.org. I saw that the chat was only for all panelists. I've saved it. Maybe we can share with everyone at the end. This is an ongoing conversation. Can't stop right now. I mean, we need to continue having these conversations. So please join me in thanking Judith Kinnard, Mónica Ponce de León, Dr. Mahesh Daas, Stephen Gray, and Robert González for joining us today. This is, again, as I mentioned, it's a really important topic that most of us will be discussing for a while, and this is just starting the planning move going forward. And this conversation has given me a lot of ideas for future race and architecture discussions. So we hope you can join us again on Tuesday, November 24th. And please remember to vote for the BSA elections and the general elections. We need to empower everyone to vote. There's a lot going on in this country, and I think we really need to be a part of the change. So you can stay up to date on our latest news at architects.org. Join the conversation on social media at BSA AIA on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And of course, sign up for our weekly newsletter, Currents. So thank you again, everyone. This has been great. I hope to continue the conversation. And again, what you said today was incredibly valuable to all of us. And Stephen, I will work on entrepreneurship, BSA, AIA, seeing how we can start changing the conversation.
GSD, BAC, Princeton, New Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. We need to be, Tulane, we need to be working together, for sure.
I agree. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye now.